Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest is Mr. Max Hoven. He is the writer, creator of Liquid Kill with Massive Publishing that is just on fire. I mean, everything coming out of Massive right now, I think is just super top notch. Obviously, Liquid Kill being one of those titles. I'm really excited to talk to you because I have read through the series and absolutely loved it. Some badass women doing some pretty badass things. We could kind of get into that a little bit more, Max. But before we do, man, I would love to know, one, how are you doing, and how's work going for you right now?
I am doing great. Thanks a lot for obviously having me on your channel. You know, we actually met in person at C2E2 at Heroic Awards.
We did. I remember you now. I thought you looked really familiar. I'm like,
Yeah,
dude, I
yeah.
look familiar. That's so awesome, man, that I got to meet you. That was pretty cool. That was the very first Heroic Awards, and I thought it wasn't bad for the first time.
No, I thought everything about it, I think, turned out well. I was proud
Yeah.
of everything Rick did and how it all turned out, and obviously all the winners.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
you had to get
I
up there too,
never,
man. You had to get up there and do a little spiel as yourself, right?
yeah, I didn't realize how much I was going to be doing,
You
actually.
did a lot.
He threw that one on me last minute.
Yeah, Rick is such a super kind guy, man. But things got a little chaotic at the end, and boy, you took on a lot of responsibility. I'm sure you were not planned to do for sure.
I've dealt with weird, high pressure, time sensitive events before, but so I kind of knew how to jump in whenever he was needing it. But yeah, when it comes to the details of like actually going up and public speaking, I wasn't expecting that. It was like, oh, okay.
It's so funny, Max. I'm looking at you. I'm like, dude, I know this guy. I know him from somewhere. And you know how it is, just sits back in the head. And I might
I
have a
was wondering if you had known, because I knew obviously because I know your channel, and
okay,
so I was like, I don't think he knows that I'm the same guy that was with him for a full day in
full
the
day working together, man.
yeah, because I
I
didn't tell
he
you
knows
about
how
like
dumb I am too.
we were so busy, I never got a chance to sit down and like explain to you my role in the industry in a way. To
Yeah.
you and I, as soon as we met, it was just like, let's hit the ground running. It's promote, promote, promote.
Yeah, man. I mean, going from the downstairs, the unloading and loading dock, going through upstairs and everything, man, I'm not built for that anymore, Max. I don't know.
No, nobody is. That's for those who don't go to conventions, especially if you just have a table or something like that. We had so much stuff, and we were not prepared to go that far. That loading dock itself is the size of a stadium, you
Yeah.
know? So just getting from one end to the other, then up the stairs and all that with all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made it though.
We made it, man. We made it out barely, but we made it out alive. And I know Rick is super appreciative of all the help. I'm sure you talked to him quite a bit, but he was happy with a lot of the help. Obviously, this was our first year. Next year is going to be pretty cool. I just think it's awesome that we have this platform where we can honor like true independence. And I got to be careful when I say that, right? Because there are publishers that are a little bit bigger, but they truly are independent. But somewhere there's got to be a line that way little young women and young men that are getting into independence for the first time have a chance to really go after an award. But it was a lot of fun, and Rick put a lot of heart into it, so I enjoyed it, man.
Yeah, I had a great time. I'm looking forward to next year, and so it's and this time we'll have even better stories.
Yes, we will. I hope so, man. That's for sure.
But now I guess we're live. I'll give you my spiel on um before we dive into really about the liquid kill aspect of it. I can go into kind of how I got hooked up with my co-writer Aaron Crow
Yeah,
and how we hooked up with the artist for this series, Gabriel Iumazark.
who's incredible,
Um,
by the way,
he's
incredible.
amazing. And so that's the funnest part of the story. So whenever I got into comics, I started uh, writing movies whenever I was in my early 20s.
Mhm.
And I wrote probably 3 or 4 screenplays, and then I I for a long time, for about 5 years, I traveled the world. I worked seasonal jobs. Mostly I worked at ski resorts in Montana. I worked in Yellowstone National Park. I traveled to all over Asia, Europe,
Oh, wow.
and I kind of, traveled myself to zero and came home and went back to college and started writing again. And I basically was just started trying to do a writing career, and I met back up with Aaron Crow. Aaron Crow and I went to high school together, and we actually wrote and directed a movie together whenever we were in high school.
Oh, cool.
The movie was supposed to be a feature film. It turned into a 28-minute short that didn't get accepted to any film festivals. This was right in the era we graduated from school in 2008. It
Okay.
was right in the era where I had filmed it on mini DV, but everything was switching to digital SLRs, and everything was going a bit more high tech, and I was just a little bit behind,
Mm,
uh, to where the festivals I was submitting to, it just wasn't up to their par.
okay.
But it was a great time, had a lot of fun, filmed all my friends. The reason it was no longer a feature is because you show up one day and all your actors are your friends and they just aren't there anymore. And it was the summer in between our senior year and college. And some people, if I didn't get the filming days done, they were just gone at college and I couldn't go there. And so we just had to like cut scenes and rewrite it. And it was this outrageous thing. But so then when after college and after I traveled for years, I got back together with him and we were like, I said, I've been writing these movies. Do you want to help me write some of these movies? And do you want to take a career in writing more seriously? And Crow had actually went to school for creative writing. He was sort of a part-time journalist, and we took on the role together and we wrote another couple of handful of screenplays and we started writing comics. And our first comic together, we put it on Webtoon. And we then basically, at that point in our careers, where Gabriel comes into play, is we just decided our next thing is going to be like our big deal. This was going to be our Jaws. This is going to be our Reservoir Dogs. Like, we're going to get big time artists involved. We're going to make it a big thing. And we each gathered a list of artists that we wanted to work with, and at the top of our list was Gabriel, and he had done just one book at the time that we knew of. It was called The Last Broadcast, that was published by Boom, their Archaea imprint.
mm,
And it wasn't that it was just an amazing book. It was just that his art style was exactly what we were looking for. There weren't that many people that were doing a very exaggerated anatomy, almost anime-esque style that wasn't full blown trying to go or mimic some other kind of like manga anime style.
very
He had a
original.
very unique,
Yeah.
unusual coloring, and so we reached out to him, and he said no initially to our first story. But he said essentially he liked the script and was interested in working with us, but he just didn't want to do that story. And he also didn't want to do something crazy long. And so we, of course, in our eyes, we're wanting to do the epic, super long. It's an ongoing epic, and and it was actually a horror story too that was a bit too graphic for him.
Okay.
And he basically gave us two options. He was like, we can do uh, more of a cyberpunk teen story, or do you have anything that's in the horror genre that's a more supernatural? And we had two of them, and we had this idea, which we pitched to him as what became ultimately It Eats What Feeds It. And that was the first book that I released that we did with Scout Comics, and that became a bestseller with Scout Comics. And it sort of launched our career, all of our careers. It relaunched his, it launched Crow and I's. It made it to where we just stopped doing the web comic on Webtoon, which was getting, some traction, but not enough to make like a real strong fan base or anything like that. And we just put like, last episode of that was called Fall Peak on Webtoon, and we just said on hiatus, and then just put like a sample page for It Eats and said, everybody just go here. This is our new project. It's going to be published through Scout at this time. And it was a hit with them. And that was this taboo romance. And it putting all our effort into that, we spent over a year making it. And Gabriel even was involved in sort of adjusting some of the story with us to make it a bit more exaggerated. And it was a whole lot of fun. And he said, you know what? I'm willing to go a bit more hardcore with you guys. And so, since it was sort of a successful for all of us, we're like, well, let's go for something bigger. Let's do something ongoing, and let's do something epic and violent, sort of scary. And that was one of the original stories I ever wrote.
Really?
That was originally an epic, huge screenplay, like almost a mini series. And in early, I want to say around 2015, 2016, when I initially had written it, it was called something different. It was called The Demon Army. I got a lot of feedback from other screenwriters who said this will never get made. It's an insane story. It's too violent. The main characters are sadistic. Um, it's the plot structure is more like a comic or a video game. And after this, It Eats, we're like, well, let's see what Gabriel thinks of what became Liquid Kill.
Yeah.
And he was said, instead of having the main two characters female, let's just do them all. And he was like, and these sort of characteristics that you give them, let's just exaggerate that even further, and let's just go full blown kind of however we want to go with it. And so we restructured it, rewrote it, spent like another year just fine tuning that, and that became what is now Liquid Kill. The full arc would be about 15 issues.
Mm.
And so what's coming out now is the first 6 issues of that full arc. That we call Volume 1 of Liquid Kill. And it's just one glimpse of a huge universe.
Yeah.
And if you want me to dive into that universe, we can go into it. Unless there's other questions you have about any of my upbringing or Crow or anything like that.
Well, I think what would be really cool before we jump into the little bit of the world building and everything that's gone into Liquid Kill, can we talk a little bit about how massive became the publisher for this? Like, did
Oh,
you shop
absolutely.
it around to a lot of different places? And who did you work with? Like, I know Kevin pretty well. Did you work with Kevin or did you work with someone else on the team? Like, how did that happen? Because I know they're very choosy on who they like to bring under their publishing because they have a vision for the style and types of comic books that they want to bring into the universes that they want to be added to Massive. I always like to understand how that all came about too.
It's an interesting story because I was there before Massive even existed. So
Okay.
it's essentially what had
At the
happened
whatnot
was,
time frame, that time frame
yeah,
or
it was before Whatnot and everything.
oh wow.
So It Eats What Feeds It went live in 2020,
Okay.
but it was solicited in 2019, I want to say, or at the very end was when we were prepping and promoting, and it eventually came out, I want to say, in uh early, like spring of 2020, I want to say. It was right after COVID hit.
Okay.
Excuse me. And it had this delayed effect of when issue 1 came out, no one knew about it. But by the time issue 3 came out, we had this word of mouth. And Comic Tom 101
Hmm.
did a whole expose on it. And I had a few other people. CB Cebulski at Marvel tweeted out saying it was one of his favorite books of the summer. And we got this whole huge second wave, which put us in this territory of Twilight where you're sort of in the indie comic space, viral.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of people that were sort of reaching out to us, including management companies wanting to buy the rights, and Kevin happened to be one of the people that wasn't reaching out to us as a publisher yet. He was just a creator at the time.
Yeah.
He had the book Freak Snow
Mm.
that was so Kevin Rodatelli is the president of what is now Massive Publishing. Before that, Massive Publishing was known as Whatnot Publishing.
Yeah.
And Whatnot Publishing was technically the, I guess, publishing arm of Whatnot Incorporated, the multi-billionaire, the tech giant, the
Yeah.
auction website for those who are unaware. And how this came about and how we became involved was Kevin sort of reached out. I can't even remember. It was just sort of one of those. We saw each other on Twitter, knew of each other's stuff, and I was following him. And Crow posted on Twitter an image from Liquid Kill before Liquid Kill was even a thing yet. It was just we had a few pages, and he
Like
had
it
just
didn't even say Liquid Kill. It was just like a pic.
didn't nothing. It
Oh
was just it
wow.
was just Crow just put out a teaser that said our next project while we were in the heat of people talking about us of the new one. So, and Kevin's very smart in that he was deliberately, and I didn't know this at the time, but he had then just he had his own imprint with Behemoth,
Yes.
Behemoth Comics at the time, which is now Sumerian.
Yes.
So at that time, he basically reached out and just said, "What are your guys' plans with this?" And because if you don't have anybody that's already on this, I want to be involved. I am basically an executive of I own my own imprint, which makes me to where if you worked with me with this, you'd be published under Behemoth. Now at that time, Behemoth had just had huge successes.
Mhm.
They had had, I mean, they still are, and now I think Behemoth Sumerian is distributed through Massive, so he still kept those partnerships to where
He's
but
a smart
anyway,
dude. Let's just say that. He's a very, very
he's
smart guy.
he's smart and he's doing a million things at once, and
Yeah.
he's good at picking and choosing. But
Yeah.
the short end of the story is he saw us. He basically said, I already know you guys are good because he had seen the hype with It Eats, and he saw that image and he was like, whatever it is, this is perfect for my brand. And we were picky people. So we were like, we're only going to work with, you know, somebody like Behemoth at the time that's doing exactly what we're doing. It's a very sci-fi horror, hardcore kind of uh violent, but not grotesque. It's a fun action flick that's female centric, cyberpunk, but not like the cyberpunk you've seen before. It doesn't dive too much in the weed. It's very action heavy. um, and Kevin, after seeing that image, he then wanted to know more. And then I think once he saw sort of like this is what the plot of that story is, or and he said, well, this is the kind of stuff that I am publishing and I'm looking for if you want to work together in the future. And once we started to get things together and we started to piece together options of other people that reached out to us, uh, we decided because at that time we were at a weird stage to where we could have basically chosen to also continue working with Scout, not just with any new stuff, but also expanding It Eats What Feeds It if we wanted, because that was on everybody. Our fans now were interested in that, but Gabriel was still our artist. So, and we had already started working with him with Liquid Kill.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, well, let's just keep the ball rolling with Gabriel and what might be this new thing with Kevin. Now, to cut forward, it took us about another year to do that. And in that year, Behemoth then became Sumerian. They got bought out by Sumerian Records. Sumerian Records started to focus more on the records and less on the comics. Kevin started to meet up, and he's so avid in the space and was making so many connections. he connected with the people at Whatnot.
Yeah.
And he connected so well and so hard, I guess, that the people that were doing the marketing for the Whatnot Incorporated, and so essentially the marketing executives with Whatnot, the billion-dollar tech company, they then said, let's partner with Kevin and Michael Solero and a few other guys and formed what was going to be Whatnot Publishing. And they had a lineup of titles that were a
Yeah.
book by
I
Michael
think
Solero, a book by
Tyler
Kevin, a book by
Kirkman,
me.
you,
What?
yeah, Tyler Kirkman, yourself. Like they brought in some pretty heavy hitters,
He
man.
had heavy hitters right away. The other
Big
big
one.
ones were the Ninja Funk duo, which
Yes.
is and the Wesley Snipes,
Yeah.
the Exiled.
Exiled. Yeah.
They had Alpha Betas, which was a huge IP,
Yeah.
and then simultaneously they're doing stuff behind the scenes of acquiring IP for video games and stuff, and so it was just it was a no brainer at that point to where and we were already essentially locked in with Kevin, and at one point uh, we were sort of in a in between of we can either stick with Behemoth or try to risk this new big thing, which is a huge risk when you think about it, because people talk big dreams in this in every world, especially entertainment, and everybody says they're going to be the next big thing. Think about how many new publishers come on board, and everybody's connected loosely in some way with something everybody knows. Almost every publisher you can think of, from like the executive team is active in Hollywood, converting IP, or they used to work as editors at Marvel and DC. Think of AWA. Think everyone you look at, there's a reason why you want to pay attention.
Yeah.
Even whenever we were at Heroic Awards, a good example was the guys before us, that the publishing company, that it was the guys from Valiant. Everybody was excited about and so when you partner with someone, in your mind you're kind of like, yes, this is going to be a big deal. But we've also watched everything fall apart
Yeah.
within years,
Yeah.
in the examples of, there's so many,
Yeah.
and so we decided to take the risk, though. And it worked out, because it's basically like, it actually turns out whichever way we would have gone about it, we still probably would have up in about in the same spot. But Liquid Kill then released the issue one, released in that first wave with Whatnot. Ours was a bit more hardcore, and so whenever we hit about issue three, they rebranded into two things, sort of Whatnot Publishing and Massive Publishing, and they put us under Massive, which was, since it was separate from Whatnot, there wasn't any censorship involved.
Mm.
So Whatnot was nervous about putting out our content, and as I'll get into later, why, there's a lot of taboo subjects in there, and it made it for a lot of risque possible covers, even though we never went, it was never full blown
Yeah.
like nudity or anything like that, but it was just intense, so to speak, mature in a sense. And so they just said, we'll put you basically under our more adult or a mature or teen plus kind of brand, which will be Massive. And now I'd actually have to get with them, but I think they basically, it's just, instead of Massive being an imprint of Whatnot, it's just all Massive now.
Yeah, I
So I
feel like
think
there's been
Massive's
a
the brand.
separation, right? And it's kind of running as its own entity now, right?
I think so, yeah. They do so much, and that's the thing, is they're still so new. You
Yeah.
you can take on so much, and as you know, when you acquire properties,
Mhm.
there's so much that is involved legally and with time, and you may have what's coming up, but the contract for the old thing doesn't end until a certain time, or you might only have certain rights in a certain country for this time, or whatever's going on. And same thing with comics, working with independent creators, you may have a book that says that's ready, but someone's delayed, someone gets sick, someone has to have surgery, it's delayed another 2 3 months, and so everything's sort of on this 1 year behind what I'm doing right now. The audience won't see until next year.
Yeah.
It's the same for creators. It's the same for the publishers. So they have so much going on that by the time they tell me, like, I don't speak to them every week.
Yeah.
So they basically update me on, here's what we're working on with this thing on our title. Oh, and by the way, we're about to have this announcement that we're going to have all this other IP and all this other stuff. And um, but it's been great. Massive has been great. They are one of the few publishers that I've experienced, and everyone that is in my bubble that's also experienced it, is very, very active, and they know how to. They actually help market your book.
Oh, they're
You know,
incredible. I think I truly think they're one of the best when it comes to marketing their own product, right? It's one thing to get into the preview mag, and it's one, like a lot of publishers, and I won't name any names, but a lot of them still are doing things the same way publishers did it 20 years ago. And Massive is just thinking completely different about how they're going about the business. And you could tell because when they first launched, I'm like, what the hell is Massive? I walked into my little tiny comic book store here, and it was a small little tiny comic book store. Like, I live in a very small town, and they had almost every single title that was available right when they launched. And they don't do that for any other publisher. So I thought, man, they don't mess around. And to this day, there's all kinds of Massive titles all over, every single Wednesday in there. So they're doing something that definitely they've cracked the code and they figured out how to get that to happen that nobody else is doing right now.
yeah, for sure. From the get go, and that's why we stuck with them. Stuck with Kevin especially because whenever we initially started talking about it, his ideas were out of the box,
Yeah.
and we are like, our ideas are out of the box. So all the same stuff that you're doing, we wanted to do already, and a lot of their talk, they actually walk or whatever, So whenever they say we have this idea to do this thing, and you say let's go for it, they actually will, say, all right, we're going to set you up with podcasts like this one, and we're going to actually get this. And if you want that artist, if I don't reach out to someone directly, they'll take it upon themselves to help out too. Like they sort of are absolutely hand in hand every step of the way when it comes to trying to make sure those sales are as big as possible. It's not reliant on my audience at all. If
Yeah.
if I didn't have an audience, they would still be able to bring pretty solid numbers for my books. And numbers wise, yeah, right away we saw, right as my wave was happening, Exiled and all the other Wave One books were just hitting, launching at 20,000, launching at 40, launching at 50, and we're just like, whoa! Like this isn't. These are, even some of the top-notch image books don't launch at, at those numbers. So we were right away just like, okay, well, we got to keep that momentum going. We don't want to be the first series that drops. It's like, oh, sorry, yours. And that's the other thing is they were setting us up to where they're like, do not get sidetracked by the success of everything around you in a way to where it was like, if yours isn't, don't expect over 100,000 sales, uh, and we're just like, well, what's the lowest number that you're predicting or whatever? And like, we can't say, like, what, it could be nothing, you could get, what was amazing is I had learned sort of the ropes and knew what to do from the get go. So we were able to predict numbers, and after the weirdness of how comic books are solicited and released, you do not really know how that works until you're in the cut of it and
Mm.
trying to actually do it yourself. I feel like before I ever actually started doing this, you see when it's in previews, you see when there's a pre-order phase, but
Yeah.
you don't realize how important that pre-order phase is and how that almost dictates how much they print, and how much the print run actually affects how much you make on the back end, and how many people order it online actually affect your sales. I didn't know any of that stuff about how you make more in some ways than the other. I
Yeah.
just assumed before I got into this space that, you sell a certain amount of copies and you make a certain amount based upon what's sold. And it doesn't work that way in reality. And so, but they've been great this whole time. But that's as much as massive that was like to round it all out. They were still very new,
Yeah.
but they're doing very well. They jumped right to the top from the get-go because they had such great connections, such a powerful ambition amongst all of them, and they just took action on those ambition. And since they had the backing of Whatnot and virtually everybody, that all the creators involved behind them, that they had the funds and whatever. And so even places like my local Slackers, which only holds a handful of titles,
Yeah.
they had massive titles. So whenever I went there, I was like, they're not going to have my book. They did. And so I went up there and I was like, I wrote that book. And they were just and those local, it's just teenagers at Slackers, and they're like, well, which that one? They're like, oh man, well now we're actually going to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know the entire ownership team. I know Kevin is the president, and I know there's a couple partners that he has. I've had him on a couple times, and one time was he was sitting at a bar in an airport. That was my first interview with him. And then the second time he was in France in a hotel. And I didn't know this, but France is the second largest comic book market in the world. And so he was there with probably your title and everybody else's title, doing the translation and trying to set up, massive for that market, because it's such an important market to win as a comic book publisher. So, I mean, the guy is, and he's full of energy. Like I've never
Yeah,
seen
he's
that guy.
young.
He's
He's
young.
I want to say he's not even like 25. Whenever I met him, he was
I
I
have a
think
son his
22 or
age.
23.
That's how young he is.
Yeah.
But he's awesome. Such an amazing guy. Always in a really good mood. I've never seen him in a bad mood. But yeah, I mean, congratulations, Max, because that's huge, man. And obviously, you're doing extremely well. About to go into your second arc here next year, right? Will be arc number two.
Yeah, it's expected to start soliciting right after volume. They're going to use the momentum of volume 1 to start up the solicitations for chapter 2 or volume 2. And
Yeah.
that's when things get really wild in this story.
As if it hasn't gotten a little wild already.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting if you, from a story perspective, it's kind of literally in layers, as if this first volume all takes place above ground.
Mhm.
Volume 2, they start going in the lower levels.
Okay. Yeah.
And by the time you get to book 3, it's sort of them escaping and all that and coming back up. But volume 2 is when you start to see what the heck's going on underneath this hotel.
Yes, certain because there's um a lot of unanswered things that are happening in this first volume. So I think volume two is going to be extremely excited for those of us that have been kind of there on this path. But let's get into the artwork, right? Because the story is incredible. What you and Pro have done has been awesome. The artwork is so unique. I don't know if you can compare that style of artwork. I know I think in an interview before that I watched, or maybe it was an article, we talked a little bit of a cyberpunk feel. And I get that a little bit, but it's different. It's like so unique that I'm not sure what you compare it to. I don't know if you have an idea of an artist who you would compare that style to, but it's very much unique in its own way.
Yeah, there as far as a specific comparable artist, yeah, there's not one. And that's why we sought him out so hardcore. And I owe my own personal success mainly due to him and because he's one of those artists that when people see it, he just has uniqueness and clear talent. And it's not mimicking anything else. We actually stole somebody, so he's from Brazil and he's anonymous. So Gabriel Iumazark is his pen name. He
Uh,
has a different he's a different person in the real world.
Yeah.
But as an artist as Gabriel Iumazark, he was did gallery art in Brazil, and some local Brazilian newspaper described his artwork as, I want to say, a, um, they used really great words that we stole and put in the bio, but it was something along the lines of an an exaggerated mix of East and West
Mm.
with a touch of, a certain Mobius or something, some kind of artist that is almost like a European, one of those highly detailed kind of artists. I can't remember, but it was yeah, his I want to say what makes it stand out is the way he draws females. So whenever he did gallery art, he was known for drawing these very slender, long leg, what Gabriel himself also calls exaggerated anatomy, to where they would have, uh, if someone is actually 6 foot tall in real life, he makes it look as if they're 9 feet tall, and that they're legs are much longer, but it's not so. It's a beautiful exaggeration.
It
It's
is.
all the good things without any of the bad, unless you're drawing a character that's super ugly.
Yeah.
And then his exaggerations are almost monstrous. And in
Yeah.
the example of Liquid Kill that you'll see in volume 2, there's a character that's like as we get deeper into the villains of this story, the the scary ugly people get really scary and ugly looking, and you can also see the way he draws our monsters.
Yeah.
You could have drawn these monsters as any sort of dinosauric reptilian looking kind of monsters, but he chose a very unusual, in that they have these uh exaggerated mouths and eyes and pointed heads and hoods, and it's just a very interesting way to go about it, which wasn't written exactly like that. Like
Yeah.
the our scripting was much more generic, in that it would be as if uh, this person has this sort of characteristics, but he took that and was just like, we're going to make that super crazy, because they were originally a lot more humanoid.
Yeah.
And for those that, whenever you get around to reading it, when you start to look at it, we do keep it Jaws-esque, to where you only see shadows of the creatures until the end of it. But now that the series been out, people know that, yeah, it's it's monsters that they're facing ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, the way he goes about doing his artwork is, and how we work with him is, I feel very different from the way probably most anyone else might work. We deliberately gave him as long as he would need to draw the way he ultimately sees it. So we always described it to him as, here's the script, but you're the director. So you ultimately have full say in the editing, so to speak, and the actual cinematic angles that are drawn. So if we scripted something as a certain character saying a certain line on a certain page, there's a few of them that they're very detailed pages, but we give him full control over. If we say the splash page is on page 6, a good example is in issue 3 of the first volume. So in this trade that'll come out, you'll see that we wrote a scene that is in a kitchen, and we wrote it as in, you see a character, basically characters cooking in a kitchen, but behind them a bunch of mayhem is happening, and they're slowly but surely basically taking out everyone in the kitchen, and uh, strategically, quietly, covering their mouths, pulling them up, tying them up, taking them away. And Gabriel basically took what was supposed to be a series of panels, and he said, let's put them side by side. Let's make these actually to where they're a mirror image of each other, to where it's actually a double page spread.
Yeah.
And it ended up amazing. It's like one of the best scenes. And although it was written like that, it was his idea essentially to go about that double page spread of doing it to give it double the impact. And it really works, I feel. And a lot of people, when they have read it and given us, like, fans say, like, that's the page that made them be like, this is a series I'm a true fan. Because it's issue 3. A lot of times people will drop off if they're not into it.
Yeah.
And this is an unusual series in that it's action heavy. We don't give you a lot of information right away. It's
Yeah.
not this giant world building where we say, in a world where half the people are alive and half the people are cyborg. We don't tell you any of that kind of stuff. It's and whenever you're saying, when people say the cyberpunk, there is very little that it's you can compare it to in the cyberpunk anime realm. You can say tone or vibes are similar, but when it comes to actual style of the artwork, not much. There's influences, obviously,
Sure.
especially in the coloring and stuff like that. But as far as the way we make the characters look cybernetic and things like that, it's very subtle. Because
Yeah.
in this world, it's not your typical cyberpunk future in that the digital aspects rule everything. In fact, what rules this realm is biology and blood.
Mhm.
So that's why those are the more sought after things in this dark world, and people want youth and they want children and they want, and
Which is why it's part of the massive and not part of the whatnot.
yeah, right, exactly. Because that's the undertone of the whole thing, is that everything is all about slavery, and the geopolitical realm is almost so uh dystopian in a way. It's almost non-existent. It's just like it's a free-for-all, almost anarchy.
Okay, yeah.
And that the way we thought about it is, if you at the after the fall of Rome, and there was and we actually took the time periods whenever we like wrote when people are born and things, is if you took sort of the 1,000 years of the Roman Empire, and then when that slowly became what we now refer to as the Holy Roman Empire, it was a lot more Game of Thrones-esque, to
Yeah.
where it wasn't just one rules them all. It's little families and factions and subcultures that are one island might have their own thing going on, and that's it. And everybody there, that's all they know. Um, and so it's like everywhere is like that. Every state in the United States is very much in that kind of realm, to where everywhere you go, and that's what these lead characters are, is in this realm. These female leads, their role is they go around the world, and the worst of the worst places, the worst of the worst districts, they just take out those leaders and free the slaves, because it's as if everywhere is just all slavery and mayhem.
They're like the
And
mud crew, man. They just go in and clean up.
I always, and I have yet to find anything truly like this, because in my mind, I always envisioned, if a world really is this evil, or even if you have something so crazy going on to where your government, and people can argue that it's like this in the real world now, to where you do have dictators and torture and slavery, and um like, who, if you can't rely on an army or police, well, then what's stopping just the meanest of the mean people? Like, if people get mad about learning about, like, the cartels trafficking people, and they're just like, we got to get these people, there's enough. If you had enough, and
Yeah.
a private militia that like came together and was like, we could single-handedly assassinate these people if they actually did come together. And so if you had those characters, that who can actually take out the bad guys?
Yeah.
Because when you start to actually write things of, if someone's this bad, it's it's not a good person that can actually take on something that dark.
Yeah.
Whenever you're going against something that, like a governmental international organization that's taken over the world, and they have so many henchmen and institutions behind them, you have to have something equally evil to take something like that down.
Yeah.
So in writing Liquid Kill, it was like, you essentially have to have somebody that's already been in that world, raised in that world as a slave that escapes with the help of others, and their sole mission is and that's why I got so much negative feedback initially, because they're like, you can't write your main characters as sadistic or actually enjoying the act of killing or whatever. And I'm like, but how
Yeah, you can.
else would someone be able to take on something this bad unless they truly enjoy it? Like they weren't just good at if you
Yeah,
watch movies and read comics, the whole tension is the dilemma of trying to do what's good, which is not killing people, and balancing the act of being a hitman, and when is it right and wrong, and when are you crossing that line?
yeah,
Well, that's the the difference of the liquid kill universe, is because in this realm you're not only nullified at birth through their horrific upbringings and then through their training, but they're as they get wounded, they're replaced with non-human, or they're slowly becoming non-human, so
yeah,
their emotions just start to go away, and so that's what makes them so undefeatable. This is the ultimate lore
yeah,
of
yeah,
the story. And we just like sort of glimpse you into that. And but that was where it all came about, of like this liquid universe that came about, and that's how I always thought of it. And I never really, Crow and I did a lot of research, and there isn't really anything that, other than Eastern, like manga things, will go that heavy and dark, and but there's just not much that goes in that realm to where the good guys really, it's not just anti-heroes, it truly is just uh where really the bad guy or the good guys are bad.
yeah.
And
That's
I
just what
just
they
it's
become, right?
yeah. How else are they going to do it? I don't know. Like, you can't
Exactly.
be good to take on something that evil. And that's the other thing that we joke about, is no one in any books or shows is ever actually evil,
Yeah,
or not. Like, we could go a lot darker even in our book if we really wanted to, but then you just get to where it's just not fun.
yeah, yeah,
But if you do go to the extremes of like, okay, in this world child trafficking is a thing, or buying and selling of blood, which I wrote this I started writing this in the early 2010s, whenever I worked in a hotel out west that was sort of elitist, so to speak, to where the clientele, a lot of them were very rich, wealthy, mysterious people,
yeah,
Ted Turners, oil tycoons.
yeah.
And there was always this hidden, back and forth of rumors of, these people dress up as animals and they rent out the entire hotel, and they do really weird stuff. Um, but after I started writing this stuff, it wasn't until now you hear all kinds of weird rumors of like, oh, they're actually, organ harvesting is a thing. And,
Yeah,
people
yeah,
do buy blood to stay young.
yeah.
And that was all just made up at the time. I thought that this was just, if it was an evil world, this is what they do. And now it's coming out like, actually, the elites do
That's
that.
what they've been doing. Oh man, Max, I mean, what an amazing storyline, and I'm so happy for you that it's going so well. Super excited for Arc 2, which will be out next year. When can people get the trade of the first 6 issues? Is it out yet? I don't think it comes
It's
out.
not out yet. It's pre-ordering now. I'll give you all the links. And the easiest place to go to right now is hovencrow.com, which is my website.
Okay,
No spaces or anything. www.hovencrow.com. The links to pre-order it are right there on the homepage. It's available on Amazon. It's going to go into comic shops. I want to say it's in comic shops August. I can actually pull up the data right now. It's expected to hit shops August 28th. It's
perfect.
available for pre-order on Amazon. It's available for pre-order, obviously, through previews and your own local comic shop. If you want to hit links to shops, you can go to League of Comic Geeks or Comic City Online or State of Comics Online, or I'm sure there's others. Um, but the easiest link is, like I was saying, hovencrow.com. Or if you go to your local comic shop, the code you want to give them is there's actually two different versions.
Okay.
The traditional trade with Gabriel Iumazark's cover, that's the sort of golden yellow cover with all the girls lined up.
Mm-hmm.
That is the order code for that one is JUN as in June, 241035. But there's another version that's they're limited to a thousand
Oh wow.
1,000 print run, and that is with Toni Infante's cover, and that was the original issue one cover, and that's a sort of blue, purple, neon looking one that highlights the one of the lead characters named Kai.
Yeah.
And that one is the same code, but 1036 instead of 1035.
241036. Beautiful, man. Man, Max, what an awesome storyline. I'm so happy for you and Crow and the rest of the team. This comic is badass. It is gruesome. It is a lot of badass women doing some pretty badass things. And when you start to get into the story and you see the evil and you see what they went through that has gotten them to this point where they can handle things the way you did, just like you were saying, like you have to get to a certain point of evil to be able to handle that kind of evil. And a lot of times that means you've gone through the result of that evil to make you that kind of a person, right? And you lose
Yeah.
your humanity while you're doing that, and that's the only way that you can handle or fight fire with fire is by going through that experience. And I feel like all of that is within this. It's an incredible world that you have built, and man, I'm so happy for you, bro.
Thank you. Yeah, we're happy and excited about it. It's been a long process. So, it's definitely been in production for over 4 years, and we started writing it, over 10 years ago. So it is amazing to see for those that are wanting to get into this space. I'm not. How much of your audience is people that just read and are fans, and how many do you know that are like active, trying to like as creators themselves?
Well, I would probably say there's probably 35, 40% of people who are active writers and trying to create themselves. And I think the rest, just want to hear what's new, what's out there, what's different. They want to understand the writing process because maybe they want to get into it. That's why I like to ask a lot of writing process questions sometimes. So it's a good blend. It's a younger audience than me, which I always find funny. But yeah, and we bring on a lot of people that are writing for larger publishers to get a really good blend of writers who are writing for smaller publishers. That way, hopefully, we're highlighting those smaller publishers or those writers that are independent, truly independent, by having folks like you that are already writing for a publisher that's well known. Because our passion really is the indie part of comic books, although I love all comic books. I really want to shine light on some of these independent writers because stories like yours, you're just not going to find in a DC and a Marvel. And that's not a shot at them at all. That's just not their market, right? But we need a market for these type of stories. So I'm so happy that we have a massive out there that are willing to take a chance on stories like this because they're awesome. And I think there's an audience for it, obviously, and they want to see those kind of things happen in their comic books. So now we're getting it.
Yeah, to make my final note, I will say that that is exactly what I think the brilliance of this time period is, not just in the world, but for comic creators and comic readers alike, is that a lot of us that were interested in things from the past that were better, so to speak,
Yeah,
storytelling wise, um, you're now seeing that anybody can write that stuff
yeah,
if you and get it made and get it published and get it in front of a lot of people. There are not many gatekeepers anymore. I
exactly.
was a nobody 4 years 5 years ago. Some could argue still, but I just through writing alone, um, telling the story that I wanted to tell and not trying to write some story for somebody else or write something that people thought people might like. We just wrote the stories that we thought were wild and no one had told before. but also that were fun and mimicked, the same kind of storytelling beats and stuff that are known to work and in the genres that we all enjoy. And there's now a huge demand for that. And I think that we're going to see more of that in the future. You're going to see the big names and the big IP. It's not only going to just be Harry Potter and Batman anymore. You're gonna actually start to see. It's every year there's going to be a new Hellboy and a new kind of indie story that rose to now mainstream zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And you could be that person, It's
Yeah.
not that crazy of a thing. It's not an impossible task. It's just, it takes longer than you'd expect. If you're 18 trying to get into this, you might not see, your story on the shelves until you're 30 something. But when you're 30 something, you're like, now it's the whole world's still at your oyster or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. Couldn't agree with you more, Max. Well, Max, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'm hoping we could do this again, especially in August. Once the trade does come out, I would love to have you come back on. Maybe we could talk a little bit more details within the story now that the story is more available. Maybe people have it. And then obviously, as we start to get into that second arc, man, I cannot wait to get my hands on that first issue and start talking about that. And then obviously anything else that you're working on, even if it's outside of Liquid Kill. But man, please, I would love to have you come back, man. I've had a blast talking with you. I spent a whole day with you and didn't even realize it. So now that I got to have this conversation with you, man, I'll never forget you again, man. And, hopefully we get to be with each other this year coming up for the next Heroic Awards, man.
For sure. Yeah, this has been great. Thanks a lot for having me on. I'll definitely be reaching back out in a few months. And yeah, I got other projects and of course further on to this series. So we'll just keep it going.
Love it, my friend. Love it, Max. I'll make sure I put down below everything that everyone needs to know to get their hands on the trade as it comes out. I'll put all of your socials on there. That way everyone knows how to follow you. And man, just thanks again. Hope you have an amazing weekend, my friend.
You as well. Thanks a lot.
All right, Max. Takes it easy, brother.
Happy 4th.
Happy 4th. Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.